This is The Solo Shot with your host, Jim Sonnet.
Tuesday's Daily Fantasy Baseball slate has a lot of good pitchers on it. There are a lot of guys we have used throughout this year who've been very good to us and who we can feel good about in general, even when you account for stuff like matchup and park factor. But a lot of them have one sort of semi-fatal flaw. It can be workload for Brandon Woodruff. It could be matchup for Kevin Gausman. It could be repeat matchup for Alek Manoah, matchup for Marcus Stroman, matchup for Joe Musgrove, location for Julio Urias. Like, all these guys have some sort of major flaw that does make them tough to get super confident in for DFS for tonight. Our job is to decide how big those red flags are and whether or not we can still use these players despite those drawbacks. So that's what I'm going to try to do for today. So let's dive on in and get you set for Tuesday night. Welcome on into the Solo Shot. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and NumberFire.com. My name is Jim Sonnet. I am a senior writer and analyst for NumberFire.com. Here to break down Tuesday's 11-game main slate with lock set for 7:05 for tonight. There is only one weather note for today, and it is a bummer. It is in Chicago at Wrigley Field. For the Cubs and Twins, winds are blowing in from left at 15 miles per hour, which means we get a massive downgrade here for both offenses. I was super into the Cubs before I saw this forecast, had to scratch them out of the stacking section because it ain't great when winds are in at 15 miles per hour at Wrigley Field. So I still think we can consider them. We'll talk about them and things to watch, but it is a massive downgrade for that Cubs offense. Still, we do have some good stacks available for today, including one that I think will fly under the radar, but I do like quite a bit. We'll talk about that in pitching in just 1 second. But first, the biggest game of Week 3 is the Monday night matchup between the Philadelphia Eagles and the Dallas Cowboys. FanDuel is making it even bigger by giving new customers 30-1 odds on either team to win. FanDuel is sports betting made simple, and they're always hooking you up with great offers. Plus, when you win, you'll get paid in as little as 24 hours. Download the FanDuel Sportsbook today and bet on the most anticipated matchup of the week. See for yourself why FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. Must be 21 plus and present in Arizona, Colorado, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Virginia, or West Virginia. New users only. $10 first deposit required. Must wager in designated offer market. Max bonus $150. See full terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Restrictions apply. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit fanduel.com/RG. In Indiana, 1-800-9-WITH-IT. In Tennessee, call the Red Line at 1-800-889-9789. In West Virginia, visit 1-800-GAMBLER.net or call 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT-STEP to 53342 in Arizona. Pitching preview for this Tuesday main slate, Brandon Woodruff is the highest salaried pitcher on FanDuel, checking in at $10,200, followed by Kevin Gausman at $9,900. Alek Manoah is $96,000. We have Marcus Stroman at $94,000. Joe Musgrove and Julio Urias are $9,000. Then we have Jordan Montgomery, Jose Urquidy, Eduardo Rodriguez, Antonio Senzatela, and Marco Gonzalez as the other guys at $8,000 or higher. And again, all these guys have some sort of issue, and some issues are more concerning than others. The one guy I think whose flaws I can best accept is Brandon Woodruff. So Brandon Woodruff will be at the top of my list for today, and I'm doing this knowing Woodruff is not going to go longer than 6 innings tonight. I can say that with almost certainty. He will not go longer than 6. It is a big red flag. I just don't feel good enough about any alternatives on this slate to replace him at the top of this list. It will lower my exposure to Woodruff for sure, knowing that he's not going to go longer than 6, but I still think that he's worth being the top option for today. The pitch count for Woodruff is muted because the Brewers don't have a lot to play for. They've already made the playoffs. They have been trying to save pitchers for like 2 months now because they've been so far ahead, and they've been doing that with Woodruff, specifically Freddie Peralta, obviously, but like Woodruff has been in there too, and his pitch counts has sometimes been high. He went 104 pitches 4 starts ago, went 101 2 starts ago, and actually did start the 7th inning in that game. But we've still seen Woodruff go exactly 6 innings in 4 straight games. No more, no less, no matter what his pitch count was, and I'm guessing this is intentional, which is fine. They should do that. The Brewers should be doing this in their position, but Woodruff is so good that while he's out there, we can still use him for DFS. Woodruff had 10 strikeouts in the first start of this 6-inning stretch. He had 8 in the next one, and that's largely while facing good offenses. St. Louis is not that in my eyes. They have a 93 WRC plus against righties with a 154 ISO. Woodruff has been adding more changeups over his past 8 starts, and his strikeout rate in that time is 28%. So it is a bummer that Woodruff is not on a full leash. Like, if we had him on a full leash, he'd be a no-brainer at the top of my list for today. But I think the effectiveness I expect him to have while he is out there is enough for me to still feel good about him. His FanDuel point totals in this 4-start stretch with 6 innings have been 58, 49, 24, 34, and some of those were against tougher offenses. So I do think that Woodruff deserves to be at the top of our list, despite the fact I can't expect him to go longer than 6 innings. 6 is fine. If he gets that quality start bonus, sick, let's go. But I think that I still think he's number 1 for today. Gausman, I don't like the matchup. On the road, facing a low strikeout team. Manoah facing the Rays for second consecutive start. Stroman facing the Red Sox. Musgrove facing the Giants. Urias at Coors Field. I think that means that our second and third pitchers will be guys who are more flawed as pitchers but are in better situations. The number 2 pitcher for me as a result of everything is Eduardo Rodriguez. I always tend to be higher on Rodriguez than others, and that's fine. And especially fine because it's been getting better recently. He's had some good starts recently that have made me feel better about being high on him personally. Rodriguez has started to increase his four-seam fastball usage over his past 9 starts. It's a solid pitch. If you look at Baseball Savant, that pitch has a whiff rate of 32%, which is, I believe, the highest of all of his pitches. His ex-WOBA against that is 302, so no objections here. If you want to throw that pitch, go for it. I think that's a good alteration. It should be no surprise that Rodriguez is doing well with that pitch. In those 9 starts, he has a 3.92 skill interactive ERA with a 26% strikeout rate. And those peripherals aren't a surprise because he's had good peripherals all year, which is why I've been on him. The results are kind of at times following suit now. It's not consistent, but there's some good starts in there. Across those 9 starts, he's let up 0 or 1 earned runs 4 times. He let up 2 in another, so that's more than half his starts, which is encouraging. His overall ERA in the stretch is 4.50 because the blowups have still been there. The floor is not good. He is not consistent, but he has a ceiling. He had 10 strikeouts in one of those games. He had 8 strikeouts in 2 others. He's facing the Mets tonight. They have a 101 WRC plus against lefties and do add a DH tonight because it's in Boston. But their ISO is 150, 36% fly ball rate. Their strikeout rate is 24%. So I know Rodriguez can be frustrating. I have been frustrated with him too, potentially more so than others because he's lost me money at times. But the underlying numbers are there, and he has a ceiling. The results have shown, not just peripherals, the results have shown he has a ceiling, and I will take that on a slate with, I would say, a decent amount of uncertainty at pitcher. So Woodruff is number 1, Rodriguez number 2, and I think that we can feel good about that despite the fact that he is an imperfect pitcher for sure. The third pitcher is, I would say, pretty similar to Rodriguez. That's Jordan Montgomery, another guy in the 8,000 range. The reason they're similar is because neither guy is super efficient with their pitches, which means they don't typically go deep in games despite having decent pitch counts. And it's super annoying when you're watching them. Like, I don't want to watch these guys pitch because they bother me if I'm using them. But the path to a good game for Montgomery here is pretty clear. He's facing the Rangers. They're just not a good team against lefties. They have a 78 WRC plus, a 121 ISO. I know Nestor Cortes last night didn't finish well, but he did start off pretty hot and faltered later on. And that's the concern with Montgomery too. That's not something that's just like we should just gloss over. That is a concern with him as well, because he was similar last week against the Orioles. Came out of the gate smoking hot, racked up 12 strikeouts, but he didn't finish 6 innings despite throwing 99 pitches. Could be because of the strikeouts. Strikeouts do drive a pitch count, but what helps here is that the matchup is much better for Montgomery than what he had last week. I respect the Orioles. They're kind of feisty against lefties. The Rangers not as much. So Montgomery could get the strikeouts like he did last week, and he's less likely to stumble late as he did in that other game. I think that's enough to make him the number 3 option of the night behind Woodruff and Rodriguez. I am willing to use Kevin Gausman. Again, I'm just worried about a repeat matchup on the road against a low strikeout team. That's not a great formula for DFS, so I'm okay putting him behind these guys. Does it worry me? Yes, because Gausman's a good pitcher, but just tough spot on the road, repeat matchup. low strikeout team, those are factors that do scare me away a little bit when it comes to Gausman. So for me, it is Woodruff 1, Rodriguez 2, Montgomery. Number 3, I'll talk about Alek Manoah in things to watch. First of all, let's talk about some stacks, and I think that although pitching doesn't have like a no-brainer option, stacking does. And I hope you did not get sick of stacking the Phillies last week, the times we used them, because they are the top option tonight, and I think that is very clear. I like them more here than I did in any of those games last week. They're facing Chris Ellis. Ellis has made 4 starts since he got fully stretched out, and the peripherals in that time are really rough. He ranks lowest on the slate in skill interactive ERA, strikeout rate, walk rate, hard hit rate, and fly ball rate. And those are the only 5 numbers that I log on my sheet for each guy. That's not a great sign. His ERA is 2.39, but his expected ERA at Baseball Savant is 5.43, and that includes the time before he was fully stretched out. We expected this initially because when you look at Ellis' numbers in AAA, they were not elite. He had a 6.32 ERA in the minors, wasn't a big ground ball guy, didn't get that many whiffs. So I think Ellis deserves kudos for the results. Like, it takes some skill to navigate your way around some rough peripherals when you're facing the Yankees and the Blue Jays in this 4-start sample. He got around that. Kudos to him for getting his way out of trouble. But peripherals just don't give me much cause to think that will continue. I think we're going to see some pretty massive regression here, and I think that we should stack the Phillies and see if that regression comes in a bunch for tonight. We talked about the Phillies a bunch recently with talking about Harper, Herrera, Gregorius, and Miller. I think those guys are still the staples for tonight, especially because the non-Harper lefties do save you a lot of salary and can let you go nuts with your second stack for tonight. We haven't talked as much about Gene Segura or JT Realmuto. Realmuto hasn't been hitting the ball as hard recently as he was earlier on this season. Segura, the power seems to have been on the rise a bit. He had a double dong back on Saturday. No steals recently. So I think if we're looking at these two righties, I would rank Realmuto higher by a bit over Segura, but he can slide some bags. The long-term power is better for Realmuto. If I need to fill one of Segura's 8 positions that he's eligible for, basically, I'm fine plugging him in. But I think I would say Realmuto is slightly above Segura among the non-lefties. But I think if we're ranking out the stacking options for today, I think the 4 lefties deserve to be above them. Freddie Galvis also in play if he plays once again. I don't like guys batting 8th in the National League Park, but I'm still willing to go there if I really need to save some salary. So the Phillies, to me, number 1 by a wide margin in terms of stacking for today. That's the obvious one. The less obvious one, and one that I think may go a bit overlooked, and potentially for good reason, is the Blue Jays. I think we have leeway to use them from a salary perspective for today, and I don't think anyone's going to use them from a roster rate perspective. Maybe they shouldn't, but I think it's worth a shot for today. They're facing Drew Rasmussen. Rasmussen has had awesome results all year long. I'm just seeing some things under the hood that could lead to some issues here. And I kind of want to stack the Jays in the spot where they're unlikely to be popular. Rasmussen has made 6 longer outings for the Rays. His ERA in those is 1.33. That does include a start against Toronto last week, where he allowed no runs on just 2 hits over 5 innings. His ERA is 3.00 for the full season, too. So good results in the sample is not a surprise. It's not new. He's pitching well. But there are 2 issues with the peripherals for Rasmussen in his more recent sample when he's been stretched out. The first one is that he's letting up a lot of balls in play. His strikeout rate is 18% with a 5% walk rate, which means he's letting up a ball in play 77% of the time, and 51% of those balls in play have been hard hit. That is the second highest mark on the slate behind just Ellis. He is getting some ground balls, Rasmussen is, but the Blue Jays did loft it a bit last week. The ground ball rate there was 39%. The hard hit rate for them was 62%. They just didn't turn it into hits. They actually had as many barrels in that game as they did base hits. I'm kind of wondering how long this will last for Rasmussen. It might stick because some guys just are better than the peripherals say, and Rasmussen could be that guy, but I'm not sure if that will be the case. So if you go to the number fire heat map, pull up the implied totals for each team, you'll see the Jays are under 4 today. This is not a spot where you want to stack the Jays if you're going based on what bookmakers are saying, but I am down to give them a swipe and see what happens. I think the Jays are going to be overlooked here on an 11-game slate, and I think that they could be interesting. So it might fail. If you're a a risk-averse person, the Jays may not be your flavor for today, but I'm there. I will be stacking them for tournaments, see what happens. Not a cash game play, but I do like them for tournaments. That does mean we have to kind of dig into Rasmussen's platoon splits and see what he does versus righties and lefties, because most of the guys we want on the Jays are righties. They're about even, though. Righties and lefties are. The only guy I'm not as into today is George Springer. He's not been hitting the ball super hard since he had those couple days off for his knee injury, so I will still use Springer, because I'm going to stack this team enough. I will just put Springer a bit lower on the priority list within the stack in terms of grading him relative to Semien, Bichette, Teoscar, all those guys, the secondary option behind Vlad. I think that I'll put Springer a bit lower on the list. Still using him, putting him a bit lower on the list to account for the fact that things haven't been as hot recently. The third stack for me is the Dodgers. They're at Coors Field, so I potentially should like them more, but I think that Antonio Senzatela is a good pitcher, and I want to give him that respect. Senzatela is a vet too, so he knows how to pitch Coors Field. His ERA there is 3.89, which is actually better than it is on the road. In the 5 home starts that Senzatela has made since he increased his four-seam fastball usage, he's let up 2, 4, 2, and 3 earned runs, so he's pitching well. That's why the Dodgers are not higher on this list. The reason we can still stack them is that Senzatela isn't fully a guy we need to avoid. He does let up a bunch of balls in play. He, in those 11 starts, has an 18% strikeout rate with a 4% walk rate. 44% of those balls in play have been hard hit. He just tends to keep them on the ground for the most part. He didn't do that as much against the Dodgers, though, back on August 29th, when they last faced about a month ago. In that game, the Dodgers had a 35% fly ball rate. That is one of the higher marks Senzatela has allowed in this stretch. They didn't score in 7 innings, so obviously Senzatela had their number, but they weren't totally off. They were getting some loft there. They weren't terrible. I think that's still interesting, and now they get him at Coors Field. I am not saying the Dodgers will crush him here, because he's a good pitcher. I just think that there are enough signs pointing to a Dodgers stack where we can do it and still feel fine, despite the fact we regard Senzatela as being good pitchers. So I do think that the Dodgers are a team that I'm willing to stack for today, despite the fact that I do respect Senzatela. Maybe ranking them third means I'll be lower on them in the consensus, but that's fine. I'm okay with that because I do respect him a lot. I will put them there, see where I rank out relative to others, but I think that's where they belong on a slate like this. It also does help that, with the pitching sours today, we should be able to get to them pretty often. If Cody Bellinger can't go again, we could get Gavin Lux back out there at $3,100. Not the world's best hitter, but he's good enough for Coors. Chris Taylor's salary is $3,500. That's low enough for me to like him as well. I don't typically get there against righties for Taylor, but more power recently. He's at Coors, $3,500. I think that the Dodgers overall are a quality stack, even if they don't check every single box for tonight. Let's move now to things to watch and talk about Manoah. I don't think I'll get there personally, despite the fact he was outstanding against this very same team last week. He had 10 strikeouts, and that could be hypocritical because I was down to use Robbie Ray last night in a repeat matchup. But Manoah, not as big of a strikeout guy as Ray is. He wasn't as elite in that first matchup as Ray was, and we saw the downsides of that with Robbie Ray last night. So, not a one-to-one comp between Ray and Manoah, but I think that given everything combined, we had the wiggle room to pass over Manoah here and see how he handles a repeat matchup and buy back into him later on. I do like what he's been doing recently. Would just rather have it against a team not as powerful as the Rays are. As mentioned before, I was going to stack the Cubs tonight, but the win scared me off. They're facing Griffin Jax. He is a big fly ball guy. I want to use the top 5 batters in this order. They just get downgraded a lot because of the wind. If we get the all clear on the wind, like if it winds up being a hallucination where the wind actually wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, then I'd put the Cubs probably number 2 above the Jays and above the Dodgers as well behind the Phillies. But for now, they're more of another to consider. You could still potentially squeeze something out here, but they do get a pretty big downgrade given the win for today. Finally, if you do need more value and we don't get the all clear on the Cubs, I think the Brewers are in play once again tonight. They're facing Jake Woodford for real this time. I wanted to stack against them in this spot last night, but it wound up being John Lester instead. So they're back on the menu for value. We can go to Willy Adames, who just came off the IL last night. Omar Narvaez, Dan Vogelbach. They're all good values here. Luis Urias may not play with Adames being back, but if he does play, I'd be there for sure. I think that Urias is a really solid option. So I think overall, the Brewers very in play for value, but I prefer the Phillies over them if you're looking strictly for some salary savers for tonight. Speaking of the Phillies, let's go to our dinger calls for this Tuesday slate. Both of them are on that very same team because, again, Ellis lets up a lot of fly balls and a lot of hard contact. So the boring call, given it's the Phillies, you could probably guess. Shocker, it's Bryce Harper. Bryce Harper, my first home run pick for today. Number 2 is Brad Miller. I don't want to overcomplicate things. I think that they are in the best spot for hitting home runs for tonight. Both those guys have some power. Facing guy lets up a lot of fly balls and hard contact. So home run calls for today are Bryce Harper and Brad Miller. That is all that we have here for today on the Solo Shot. Back once again later on today to talk more baseball at 4:30 on the FanDuel YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Twitter pages. First, though, we have our waiver wire Q&A with myself and JJ Zachariason breaking down the top waiver ads for your season-long leagues heading into week number 3. Check that out by subscribing to the FanDuel YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Twitter pages. Swing by at 4 p.m. for that and stick around for MLB at 4:30. Brandon Gadula is going to talk about PGA today for the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast. I'll be back on that once baseball season is done. Brandon will have that have you covered. I think they're doing something for the Ryder Cup, but not totally sure. Think they are. Either way, check that out if it does go up just by subscribing to the Number Fire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. Our Week 2 NFL DFS Recap Podcast is already up, breaking down the big takeaways from this past week, talking quarterback injuries, talking receivers with good role changes, talking Saquon Barkley for Week 3. Check that out by searching for the Number Fire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, leave us a rating and review as well. If you've got more questions for me, I am on Twitter at JimSannes, JimSannes. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Big thank you to everyone for tuning in for today. Good luck to you tonight. We'll talk to you once again tomorrow. This has been the Solo Shot right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.